Is everybody who's on line? Is Commissioner Dawson out there? Anybody know?
She is signed in, she's muted right now.
Oh, okay.
I have Rob Remmer, Dave Beats, Tyson, Vicki Dawson, Mr. McGilty, and then I have two phone numbers, 429 and 30155. They can identify themselves.
Hi, Carolyn. This is Donald Cress from the Planning Department. I'm the 0155.
Thank you.
And then I'm Tony Yuko with MBN Engineering.
Super.
Who was with MBN? Tony? Did you say Tony?
Yeah, Tony Yuko with MBN Engineering.
Okay, so a lot of our guests will be associated with our first two items. We do have item number 1, review proposal from Fargo Moorhead Community Theater on reconstruction of their damaged roof, and then proposed expansion plans. We also have our legal counsel, Andy Noah, sitting here to help us answer any questions. And Eloise, are you on the line too?
I am on the line, yes.
Okay. And I'll just give a brief introduction here. The FMCT Community Theater roof was damaged over the winter due to some snow loading conditions and is currently temporarily shored up, and they're working on repairs to the building, but they also would like to move forward as part of the process and expand their community theater possibly to the west with the addition of a black box theater and some other needed space requirements they have. And to give kind of a quick background, and that's why we also have Andy Noah here. And I'm just going to go back from the very start of the Park District taking over Island Park from what I know. I think it was back in the 1800s that the railroad initially came in and deeded that land to the city of Fargo. And then in 1910, 1911, the city of Fargo gave the Fargo Park District I would call it a maintenance easement for most of Island Park property to operate as a park. It was just a couple of years previously that the Park District was created in 1907. So in 1911, the Park District operated the park. In 1955, the city of Fargo did a quitclaim deed to the Park District for the majority of Island Park, along with blocks 19 and 20, which they deeded to the Park District, which does not have the restrictive covenants that are associated with the railroad. And let me go back a little bit. When the railroad deeded that to the city, and then the city deeded that to the Park District, there was a mention on there for sole purposes only, solely for park purposes only. So you can kind of take that to mean parks, trees, open space. I guess it can be interpreted many different ways over the years, but it says sole park purposes solely. So the Park District took that over in, I think I said 1955. In 1966, the Fargo Community Theater came to the Park District and asked for a lease agreement to construct and build a Fargo Community Theater there. And that was on originally about 30,000 square feet. The Park District drafted up a lease with them, and so since then the Fargo Community Theater has been there. In 1984, the Fargo Community Theater came to the Park District again with some expansion plans for an additional 11,000 square feet of park space to increase the size of the theater. At that time, the Park District approved it with a one-page agreement, which allowed them to expand. Some of the improvements took place, but it really never expanded the footprint on the Park District property. So that was in 1984. And after that one-page agreement, that expansion was either never conveyed to the county, so it didn't show up on the city's GIS aerials as additional space. In 1994, the FMCT again came to the Park District to get approval for a set of expansion plans, not permission to expand on the property, just approval of the plans, which they did. And again, they didn't expand on the Park District property. And, you know, after that, it gets a little confusing. We've got, the YMCA had requested some expansion or some additional property from the Park District to expand to the west. And that, I believe, couldn't be sold to the Y, but they had to do it through an encroachment or an easement. And then again, in 2015, they expanded the pool to the south, which they did with an expansion or encroachment agreement. And then that brings us to today with FMCT's request to expand their theater. And this is my legalese. Expand their theater onto a previously approved 11,000 square foot expansion on the Park District property. So there's a lot of moving parts as part of this, and that's why Andy Noah's here, and I know I've missed some steps and parts in all this, and Andy can fill in all the blanks that hopefully I haven't confused too many people of. But right now, the Fargo Moorhead Community Theater is requesting from the Park District, as part of their reconstruction of their roof, approval to expand their community theater to the west with an additional black box theater. And we've met with their group, we've met with our park maintenance team, which includes our forester, trying to mitigate impacts to the park and trees in that area. So that's what I know right now, and I'll open it up to Andy to fill in any holes I may have missed, or if you guys just have questions for Mr. Noah, or questions for myself, or FMCT, or Eloise, if you want to maybe say some words.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for continuing to look at all of this. Since the last time we talked, we have hired a construction manager. We've, as said, we've talked to the forestry department. We were in a city site planning meeting yesterday. We will be doing a parking study. So we've been working on this. We've also come up with several different scenarios, as was requested, to take a look at, well, how can we reconfigure this so that we're not disturbing so many trees? So we've been working on it. I think one of the questions that people go, well, why do you want to do this? And when this roof structure failed, one of the things from the community was simply, please don't move. We want you to stay there. Please fix the theater. We want it there. It wasn't, why don't you move somewhere else? It was very important for the community members to still maintain the space that we had. And over the last 5 years, we have grown so much. Our audience has increased 133%. Our theater education classes for adults through children, 250%. And the community uses this as a rental space. I'm sure many of you have been there for 1 million cups, but our rentals have increased by 21%. And as I look at the mission for the Park District, and I look at our mission, they're very similar. You're serving the community to improve their lifestyle, and we are trying to engage and enrich the greater community with theater arts. So we're both community service people, and I'm hope that we can find a way to work all this out. I think that growth size-wise, so we can get our community even using this facility more and sharing the park with them, is really what our objective is here.
Eloise, is option 1 your preferred option?
It's the preferred option, yes.
And just for everybody, option 1 was their initial proposal, which has the full-size, basically square concept of the black box theater on the southwest corner of the facility. And this option does impact the most trees for the park. So I know they did discuss a couple of different options, and I don't know if we have any questions at this time, or maybe we'd like the architect to kind of discuss the 4 options.
Well, I've got a question that's not part of the plan here, but it's kind of the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about, and that's, you know, the increased size and increased volume of people coming. Where's everyone going to park? I think parking is an issue already, and you know, we're just going to put more pressure on parking and traffic, and that's something that's outside of, you know, Plan A or Plan 4 or whatever, but it's something that's I've been thinking about.
Well, we will be working with the city, coming up with a parking site. We'll do some planning for parking. Surrounding the building, there are actually quite a few places to park, but like everyone in this area, they want to park at the front door and walk in, and that's not possible.
Donald, do you have any comments on that, or are you just kind of sitting in?
Let me take you off the speaker. Thanks. Hi, this is Donald Cress from the Fargo Planning Department. I believe, as Eloise referred to yesterday, the FMCT folks met with Kylie Bagley, who's our planner who handles site plan review, and that was also meeting with other city departments, including engineering, inspections, and fire. Is that right, Eloise? That was yesterday, right?
Fire was not there.
Oh, okay. Well, but engineering and inspections were there probably, right? Or is it just Kylie?
It was Kylie and engineering, I believe.
Oh, okay, Kylie and engineering, okay. I'm not part of that directly, that site plan review process. And so we're, as Eloise said, we're looking at what their options are. We are helping them evaluate parking. Both Eloise and the architect and the engineer provided some information on the current parking situation, size of the building, square footage of the building, capacities of the existing and proposed facilities. So we're working to see if we can, you know, how that works with our parking ratios. Excuse me. We're just evaluating that for them. Parking is always challenging. I've parked there many times over the years. In the interest of full disclosure, I've even worked there occasionally. I used to be a theater technical director, so I've occasionally even worked there. So, like I said, Eloise is going through our process to evaluate parking and see if a parking modification to the requirements would be an option. That's a process that generally goes through the Planning Commission as a conditional use permit. Was there any other direction at that meeting yesterday, Eloise? I was not there, but
there was not any other direction. No.
Okay, we're just looking at it with you, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's the stage we're at now.
Will there be like a report or recommendations, or will something come of that we have to look at, or how does that play out?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't know, and I guess I couldn't figure out how to turn this, well, it doesn't matter. We'll see what happens out of that. We'll let you know if Dave, and just folks so you know, Dave and I have been in contact about this project here quite a bit, discussing the history of it and the options as well. So we'll find out what happened from that, or if what we get as a result of the evaluation. I'll maybe just have Kylie give you a contact here, Dave, in the next few days after she and engineering and maybe inspections have looked at this and seen what a reasonable option is. But you park, all the parking is not yours, right? So you park across the street there, Eloise, and then you also park in the Y a bit too, and then some people.
Yeah, we park across the street in the Bowl. We use a little bit of Prairie at St. John's. We do not park in the Y. That's their parking. So, but there's a lot of street parking, and as they redid 4th Street with the sewer separation, they're actually created places along 4th Street that you can park. So that adds a few spaces also. Okay. And those are the things that we'll look at in relation to our parking ratios. I don't have my ordinance in front of me here, but as you all know, our land development code, which is our zoning ordinance, the LDC, the land development code, provides parking ratios for all sorts of uses based on various things. A lot of times it's based on square footage, for the office or the storage space. For assembly areas, it's usually based on one space per certain number of seats. And then we also have alternative ways to evaluate this for kind of complex or almost really redevelopment situations like this, where you've got an existing building that has grown
or is potentially growing, but the resources are limited, and that includes evaluation by our traffic engineer too, and probably some kind of parking study. So it can get fairly complex here, and again, I don't know what exactly is going to be required here, but we should have some more information for you, Dave, here in the next few days or early next week, I'd say, at least what the next step might be.
Thanks, Donald.
You and Eloise.
So do you want to look at the 4 options and we kind of give you a breakdown of the requested park expansion?
Yep.
Okay, I know some of you online probably won't be able to see all this, but we've got quite a few here. Is that space of this, Carolyn, or?
This particular thing is what I do right now.
Okay, so it looks like the original, well, 2,900 or 29,900 square feet is this dotted line right here. And it goes right through here. That's the original. It shows up on the City Fargo GIS website. And we don't know this in 1984 when they requested 11,000 square feet. We didn't have aerial site plans. We don't know the layout of that requested expansion into the park. The 11,000 square feet they're asking for now is shown by this darker line that extends into the park right here. And then there's a small sliver on the south side. So as I said, we don't know what was approved in 1984, but the 11,000 square feet now shows up as this dark line, or the dark dotted line. You can see with this option, it does impact 3 trees here, and while those trees come down, the construction, everything does impact quite a few trees on the west side right here, because anytime you get into the root zone of basically the drip line of the canopy of the tree, it actually affects the health of that tree, and the tree could die over 5-10 years. It just has dire consequences on that. And as I said before, we had our forester and our park operations team look at that. But I believe the layout rate we have now is, you scroll up maybe a little bit, is that option?
That's option.
It looks like option 2.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So, I don't know if we have option 1 on there.
Yeah.
We'll put it there. Option 1 shows the black box more down here and extends out a little further and impacts more trees. This is Eloise, is option 2, maybe your second preferred option.
Yes, that's correct.
Back to the park.
Yes.
Yeah. So with option 2, the black box goes from being a perfectly square shape to more of a rectangular shape, which isn't ideal for them, but would still work. And actually, there would only be 3 tree removals, and then we'd have to do some mitigation with wood chips for a construction area. And then after the construction was done, you go in there and aerify the roots and aerate them just to try to help take some of that compacted damage off the trees. So this is option 2. And I don't know if we're going to be able to get to 3 and 4 just because the Wi-Fi probably doesn't keep up quick enough.
You want 3 now?
Does 3 come up?
Hi, Dave. This is Rob with JLG.
Kara?
One thing I just wanted to note, the black perimeter line that is being referenced as the new expansion isn't always 11,000 square feet of new leasable square footage. It varies with the design option and is something that that FMCT would want to work with the park district and with the attorneys to determine what the right sort of spacing away from the building. Like, it doesn't need to be a perfect rectangle coming off of all sides. What it really wants to be is appropriate setbacks from the property line to the building line, as kind of related to the city's land development code, which allows flexibility for FMCT to be able to design the building without fire rating considerations, or it gives the most flexibility. So for instance, if you're 20 feet away from the property line with a building, you don't have to build with certain construction means to protect at a certain level of fire rating, where if you get within that proximity, so say you get within 15 feet of the property line in the building, there's requirements that say you can only have so much glazing, windows, looking out into the park, it starts to impact the design. That again can be massaged, and the design can be massaged to allow for those setback requirements. And there may be different measures that can be taken with the city, knowing that it is park on all sides and not another building. That sort of code restriction, the basis of that is really around two property lines right next to each other with buildings directly adjacent to the property line, and then the chance of fire jumping from one to the other. So I just wanted to add that commentary that distance, we're showing some distances from that line. We would want to massage those. I think the big intent today is to understand the facilities committee's opinion on direction to move forward. Is there an option to move forward looking at expansion to the west and making sure that that the project has appropriate legs and due diligence before they move further with design, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Dave?
Yeah, and I'll just, since we can't get all the options coming up, I'll just give a quick kind of the four options. As I mentioned, option one had the black box further down in the southwest corner. That impacted the most trees. Option two, they slid it to the north a little bit and made it more rectangular. While this still works, it's still a good option for them. Option three, look to move the black box even further north, trying to get away from this hillside and expand it to the north. And I think, as Rob has mentioned to us earlier, where the black box here kind of fits in the two-story structure, three-story structure of the stage, up here it would kind of be isolated in its own little facility. It would stand out more up on the north end, so that's option three. They did look at a fourth option, which has the black box located on the east side of the building, and I asked them to include that just to let everybody know they did look at that option. And I think that was just a non-starter, correct, Eloise, option four?
That's correct. Number 4 just doesn't work for us at all.
Just for storage, back of stage type of things and flow of the building. So I asked them to include it. I think the commissioners probably had that in a board packet, but I think it's basically down to 3 options. And as I said before, the further north you go, the less impacts you have to the hillside and to existing trees. I think option 2 maybe preferable to the park, or option 3 might be preferable to the park district, which moves it way up here for tree impacts, but that might not necessarily be the preferred option for FMCT. So, David Beats, I don't know if you have anything to add to the park and tree impacts. If you're out there. Okay. Is there any other questions for myself? Legal questions? I think what we've talked about with. Yep.
I'm John Marshall from Fargo.
Oh, hey, Tom.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm opposed to any encroachment on the Island Park. I don't get it. You brought up about 5 different times where people have encroached on the park. The park is the heart and soul of Fargo, and everybody wants a piece of it. You say option 4 is least desirable for the Fargo Community Theater. It's the best Island Park. It doesn't take away any trees. Why is it always for the Fargo Memorial Community Theater and not Island Park? I've been using that park for 65 years. And I'd sure like something left for grandkids. I run marathons. I run through that park probably 4 times a month. It's something special. And why is everybody wanting to encroach? A couple years ago, they wanted a dog park down there. And now suddenly it's an improvement. I'm probably too late because it sounds like it's already a done deal.
Yeah, no, we haven't made any decisions yet.
I don't know why. I mean, it's a neat park. Everybody wants a part of it. Why isn't it just a park where people can, everybody can use it? That's, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And just for everybody's, we did have a couple letters sent to the park district Two of the letters were in support of the FMCT expansion, and two of the letters, and Tom was one of them, were against any expansion of the park, so just FYI on that. And so thank you, Tom, for coming. Yeah, no, we're just kind of going through everything, Tom, feeling it out, getting the pulse of, you know, the expansion, the encroachment, affects the park, affects the theater, so.
Dave, I'd like to hear from Andy Noah more in line with the legality of this in regard to the original agreement with the railroad and the city.
There's your cue.
All right, yeah, so just to kind of reiterate some of the stuff that David mentioned, a little bit of clarification. Really the impetus for what we're talking about is a plat that was done in 1877 by the Northern Pacific Railroad Company. And at that time, it was various residential lots, but then it also included the area for Highland Park. And on the plat itself, and this is exactly what the notation reads, it says Highland Park dedicated by the Northern Pacific Railroad Company to the town of Fargo for use as a public park solely. So that's 1877. There's no, generally when you have such a dedication or a covenant like that, you may have a what's called a reverter that says, okay, what happens if in the event that you violate that? What happens? Does it go back to the railroad? Where does it go? There's nothing in what I've been able to uncover. You're dealing with old records, but there's nothing that I've been able to uncover to say what's the remedy. Okay, so that's 1877. As Dave indicated, in 1911, the city of Fargo granted the Park District an easement, basically to operate Island Park, but in accordance with this dedication language. And then in 1955, the city actually deeded the property to the Park District, again, referencing this public park solely language. So that's there, and I can't tell you whether it was ever addressed when the original lease was done in 1966. It doesn't appear from what I've seen that the city or the BN, which would be the successor to Northern Pacific Railroad Company, consented to this FMCT lease. I don't have that background. Obviously, the argument now, it's been 20, the original term of the lease was 20 years. You could say that the city and the railroad have basically acquiesced in the fact that it's been used like that. The concern I have from the Park District standpoint, if you're going to go forward, I think the most conservative approach is, given the dollars that are going to be spent, and if you're going to be asked, likely you would be asked part of it, since they're going to sink a lot of dollars into it, they're going to want a long-term lease to know that we're going to stick all this money into this property. We've got a lease for a long period of time that we're going to be able to use the property. So I think the most conservative approach would be is that you get consent from the city and the railroad for this use. I think that's going to be an issue that the FMCT would have to address with their potential lenders, because if they do the title work on the property and come across the fact that there is this restriction essentially for this use, are their lenders going to be comfortable loaning money based off of the fact that there is this restriction, and is it allowable use? So I think from the Park District standpoint, the most conservatives say it's here, we'll get consent. The only other way you could go is saying, here it is in the lease, and FMCT, you're going to indemnify us for any damages or claims based off of that restriction. Again, I don't think that's in the best interest of the Park District or the FMCT. I think the better approach is to get the consent from those two parties.
I like that. I think that's the right thing to do.
So Andy, are you saying that you don't know if they originally even should have allowed the FMCT to build there?
Correct. I don't have the history of whether the city was involved at all or whether the railroad was involved. I don't have any records that predated our firm's involvement, I believe, but I haven't come across anything that the city or the railroad signed off on that.
But because it's been 52 years since the structure has been there. Is there any kind of law that no longer pertains because it's already in place? If the railroad came back and said, you know, no, this wasn't the intent and we wanted it removed, is that something they can do?
Yeah, certainly I think that there is arguments to be made. The issue where we're at this point is, you know, if it was all of a sudden, nothing had happened to their facility and all of a sudden the city or the railroad all of a sudden came up with this issue and said, hey, there's this restriction. I think that then we have a pretty good argument. But here where you're changing the situation and there is going to be a significant investment of funds and likely again, extension of that lease for a longer period of time. And then if you add in the fact that you're talking about potential further expansion into the park, I think all of those things, you know, kind of dictate that, hey, let's stop now. And if it wasn't done correctly before, we got to do it correctly this time.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you that we can't move forward just hoping that it's okay and then all that time and money and everything would be invested and it's not okay. That would be hugely detrimental, especially to the FMCT. Okay, and so thank you, Andy. I do have a question for probably Eloise. Option 4, you say that's your least desirable. Can you explain why that's your least desirable?
One of the things that does is by putting that black box in the front of the theater, first of all, one of our goals with the black box was to actually have windows so it would bring the park into the facility. By putting it on the east side, we've suddenly lost that. We aren't able to do, I mean, we can put windows in, but people are going to be looking at 4th Street instead of the park, which is what we wanted to share this building with the park. So we wanted to bring the park into the building through the use of windows. Also, we have a drop-off in front of the facility on 4th Street, and that makes it much easier for all of those children and parents to be able to use the classroom on the east side of the building. We also run into an issue actually by not putting it down in that corner, we run into an issue of getting the scene shop, getting any material from the scene shop to that black box to be able to utilize it in the way we would want it to. There's not a good way to get it through a little, you know, any kind of backdrops through through those little corners. And we can't build in a black box. That doesn't work either because of all the construction mess that occurs in there.
What's the wall height for the classrooms?
Probably about 18 feet on the exterior, 15 to 18 feet on the exterior.
And what's the wall height for the black box?
About 35 feet on the exterior, about 30 foot clear, and then with structure and parapet, around 35.
And I appreciate, Eloise, what you're saying about, you know, the black box. You want to bring the park into the building. I look at it from the opposite view of being in the park and seeing that building. And right now I see a very quaint a building that blends well with the outside look. It doesn't overwhelm the park. And from what I've seen from the sketches and the plans, it's a very, very different look. Some people obviously will love this design, but it obviously will be extremely noticeable as opposed to blending into the park. So, you know, I could probably stop right at the part where Andy says, yeah, we don't know how this is going to go, and we don't even know that we can legally do this. But if we're going beyond that, I look at some of this, the view and the concept and the encroachment. Option 4 would be way more in line with anything I would be interested in than the others.
One note, I think, this is Rob with JLG. One note on that really stands out for me on just the black box on the west side is the loss of the ability to do dual functions with a lobby space when it's on the west side of the building versus the east. So an option for with it on the east side, it's hard to do two functions in that space, use the black box and the main theater space at the same time, just because of existing sort of lobby gathering space, where when you spread those two apart across that concourse, it seems very feasible to be able to do an event that's in the black box that's separated from the theater space, and then share the functionality of the restroom sort of sandwiched between. So it's really, from a program circulation standpoint, really efficient. That was just one sort of, I guess, pro of the options on the east side, is it was kind of separating people, which seems really great from, say, corporate rental events that are maybe hosting multiple things that are happening in the facility at the same time, or if there's a theater event or something happening in the main stage space, and additionally they're set up for something that could be happening in the evening, or a different production that could be happening in the black box. So I think circulation becomes challenging, not impossible in option 4, but multi-use of the facility is inhibited, I think, somewhat. And also, a real quick note on the schematic design concept. I will say that the design from a schematic standpoint is incredibly preliminary. There would be a lot of different ways to approach the schematic design. We have spent very little time focused yet on what that exterior aesthetic would be, because most of the time spent has been on sort of making sure due diligence is done, because without understanding if expansion to the west is going to be allowed, it's been hard to focus on, I guess the aesthetics of it. So if it wasn't going to be allowed to the west whatsoever, then, other decisions would need to be made by FMCT, and further aesthetic study of multiple options to understand what is the right fit definitely could be studied. And we have spoken internally, but haven't had the chance to, really develop those options yet. Would be happy to.
Eloise, this is Kevin Bowe from the Park District. I had a question on option 1. What does your programming look like for the patio outside of the black box area?
Excuse me. I don't really see any programming done on the patio. I don't see what would we do on the patio. No, we wouldn't have programming there. And I don't see it as a rental location either for that patio, because there's no way for us to manage that, I guess is what I would say.
So what would the purpose of the patio be?
The purpose of the patio is just as an entrance. Again, we're trying to bring the look of the park in. So it's a place where people could sit down, enjoy the park. Maybe they want to sit out there in the summer before they come into the black box theater. It's I don't see it as a rental, no. And I could be wrong. Maybe once we start using it, maybe somebody has a great idea. But as of right now, I'm sorry, I don't see that as a rental location.
And you presently allow alcohol for private events?
We do sell alcohol. It is not allowed out of the building, and we have not had a problem with that. We monitor that very closely.
Of course, you haven't had a west entrance that goes into the park either.
We do have double doors there. Yes, we do. And off the pavilion, there's also doors to the west.
So, this is Jerry, Ross said, I gotta ask this question because it's another one that's in my head that's kind of sort of related but different. Have you guys considered, I've grown up in this community, FMCT and Island Park are synonymous. And so that, when I think of FMCT, I think of Island Park, but have you even considered alternative locations? Has that even been something that's you've looked at in the scope of this thing?
We have not considered other locations, no. For us to leave this building and build another, find land, lease another land somewhere else, and actually build this type of building would be extremely expensive.
Well, I like Andy's suggestion of at least starting with consent. It doesn't hurt to go back and correct the things that may not have been done or correctly documented, so we at least have that basis going forward. To me, that seems like the right maneuver to do. So we've got that information, and that solidifies both FMCT and the Fargo Park District as to any future decisions after that.
And Eloise, this is Dave again, and maybe a question for you and Andy. So I know you want to get your roof structure repaired, you know, so you can operate yet this year. And I know you want to kind of do everything together to eliminate, you know, mobilization and everything. And maybe a question for Andy, I mean, can they still proceed with repairs to their facility under our current lease, or is there anything they need to hold off on that, or?
I would say, again, the conservative approach is to hold off at this point. I just can't, you know, you make that investment and this issue's been raised, and if you approach the city or the railroad and they decide, you know, we don't want to go forward, again, obviously they have the issue of, hey, it's been fine for this period of time, but right now the lease had a 20-year term, that's expired. It's basically kind of a month to month. The theater did have the option to renew, but it was on such terms that is mutually agreeable to both parties. Nothing has been agreed to at this point, so it's kind of a little bit of a tough area, I guess, but for the Park District to say, yes, go ahead and do it, I don't think that's the Park District's position that we should be taking at this point.
And I think in our conversations, you had a little work with the railroad. What's kind of their timeline, and can be expedited to get their approval or not approval, or?
Yeah, and again, at a certain point, our office does work with the BN, so we may have a conflict, but I guess I wouldn't envision that the railroad always moves particularly fast. So I can't give you any assurance on that. And I just to follow up, I think as part of that, what would be helpful, and not even helpful, what's really going to be needed is looking at what the scope of the use is going to be. If we're going to go into a new lease, if we're going to go to approach the city and we're going to approach the BN, what is the use of this facility? And you look at the old lease and say, okay, is that consistent with what the new use provision in our new lease would be? There's a lot of, you know, is there going to be parking? You know, that may one that says, hey, we're not going to allow parking on this site at all. That's not, you know, this is completely different. Under the old lease, it basically gave the theater complete control of programming, and the Park District didn't have any control over that. So it's, to me, it's to at least move that forward if we're presenting this to the city and the railroad as what is the use going to be allowed. You might want to look at, after talking to the FMCT, what kind of a new lease term are we talking about? I think those would be kind of the big issues as to if we're going to start the conversation with them, that we would at least need to know. And I would note, just as an aside, that 1984 agreement, if you looked at it, it approved the space on the specific plans, but it was based off of 3 conditions. There's a tree plan. Bob Johnson was appointed to their committee, and that the Park District really wanted to be involved with that. And the third thing was, and I don't know if this was intended to address this public park use solely, but was a provision that allowed the Park District to use the facility on an as available basis. So I don't know if that's ever been done or contemplated, or just raise it for.
So Andy's points raised one of the questions I had asked before, but I want to ask about it again, the use of the black box. And you had said, I think there were going to be a handful of theater events where they'd actually use it as a theater. Eloise, do you have a anticipated number of those per year that would take place in that space?
I would say probably 4 would be my assumption at this point.
Okay, and so the rest of the year would be used for private rentals?
Additional rehearsal space.
Okay.
So are you saying that we should go ahead and start negotiating with the FMCT on the use of this space and what they want? And then in conjunction, wait for the city to come back with a parking study to determine if there's a sufficient parking for their plans for this site? And then once we get through that point, then we go to the BN and the city and say, you know, we come together at consensus on what we think this should be. Would you grant this or bless this idea?
Yeah, well, it's, I hate to have a lot of resources committed to something that at the end of the day could be not true.
Right.
You know, so I think that, to me, the starting point is a conversation with FMCT and their council to say, okay, we're dealing with this. How are we going to approach it? Because it's the other part of it is who's going to take the laboring war in approaching the city. City may be a little bit easier to deal with as far as getting this through, but from my experience, the Burlington Northern is there's going to take some time of explanation. What are we doing? You know, following up and that type of thing. Is that something that council for the park district is going to take care of, or working with their attorney? But I think that first conversation is with FMCT's council. They have to understand what, if they're going to go out and try to get funds for this from a bank, we're going to need this consent, and then we can approach it from there.
So my understanding of this is nothing can happen until those consents go through. And if nothing happens, the Fargo Park District just continues with Island Park as it is. So the entire burden of this would be on the FMCT. And so my thought would be that the ball is now in FMCT's court, and the Park District has no need to act on anything until we know for certain that this is even allowable. Would that be correct, Andy?
It's certainly the big first hurdle that needs to get over, but I do think as part of that, we probably need to have some conversation again to clarify what the ask is to the city, and probably more importantly, the railroad.
So you're saying you think we need to know which option we're looking at, or how much land we're talking about, or what?
I wouldn't say what option. I would say the critical terms would be probably the term of the lease that's being proposed, the scope of the use, and forgot the other one. But I do think as part, when I say scope of the use, I think it gets back to some of the issues that you were raising, is the sense that what can this facility be used for? And I'm not giving an opinion one way or another, but I think you need to be clear when you're asking, this is what we're going to allow this facility to be used for. Is it consistent, or does the railroad and the city feel consistent with what the original dedication was? Or in large part, is the use consistent with what was intended?
Correct, and that would be my greater concern. You want to add this large black box that 95% of the time is going to be, heck, more than that, is going to be potentially rental to outside groups. And I understand the patio isn't intended to be programmed, but, you know, Eloise, you said, well, there could be at some point, and there are just so many concerns that come up in my brain about having that west lobby, west patio, outside area, private events that go out into the park, and I understand you say no alcohol out there, private security, but this is beyond the use of it being just a theater, and so there's some of my concerns as well.
Yeah, I guess the third thing that I was thinking about is whether expansion of the original footprint is part of the request.
Well, we're waiting. That happened with the roof last year, and It put us in a spot now where, you know, even though for 50 years later, the theater's around, yeah, I think we need to go back and do things right. And I'm, you know, legal, sometimes frustrated too because you impede things and slow things down, but it sure seems in this case this is the right thing to do, but we just have to at least get the legal part squared away before we can move to start. I guess that step, I don't know where you're at.
I think we need to do a little more homework to determine where we get too far down the road and all of a sudden there's a legal mess on it. It was appropriate to push the road.
I'm having a hard time hearing, and there's some, it almost sounds like a candy wrapper. I don't know if somebody's not muted and there's some noise or if it's a connection issue, but anyway, I'm struggling to hear what Jerry and Stacy said.
I think, well, I was just gonna say, I think, you know, to surmise it, basically we still got some, legal hurdles to jump through. I think, you know, Andy would probably want to get together with FMCT's legal team and figure out the next step forward with the City of Fargo and the railroad. Correct. And get their initial thoughts. If there's a way forward, maybe then it comes back to the commissioners and say, are they open to the idea of an expansion? I mean, as Andy said, we're gonna have to draft a new lease. As part of that would be the scope of use, and then is there a way forward for an expansion, or do we allow them to reconstruct in the same footprint? Railroad and city good with either of those two options.
And I want to restate this, that I would expect that the brunt of this expense is FMCT's and not the Fargo Park District's. The Fargo Park District has incurred, you know, a decent amount of legal expense already on this, and I would say FMCT is the one who needs to determine and put in the resources to get the approval and make sure this is something that's even legal to do.
Any other comments? Kind of puts a wrap on this first item here. I think we've got our directions forward unless anybody else has any more input.
So right now, we wouldn't include it in the June board meeting.
Correct.
Okay. All right, any other last comments from anybody? All right, thanks everybody for joining virtually. Eloise, Tony, Rob.
Thanks, Dave.
Hey, Dave.
Thank you, commissioners.
We'll move on to item 2.
Dave,
Yep.
this is Donald Cress from planning. I don't think you need me anymore, so I'm going to go off the call here unless you think you need me for something else.
Oh, you don't want to join us for the next hour or so?
No, I get to talk to you again this afternoon, so.
All right, thanks, Donald.
Yes, sir. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.
All right, I probably said this at the beginning, and I know we got a long agenda, and, you know, the first item is going to be a long one, so we'll just try to keep things moving as quickly as possible. I know Jerry said he had to.
So I'm here for the duration.
I was going to say you can come back, we'll probably still be motoring on at 10, so. All right, sir. Yeah, you're dismissed. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
All right, our next item is review request from Fargo Youth Baseball to construct a clubhouse at Starion Field. Alex, Summer of Fargo Youth Baseball is here along with Ryan Such and Jeff Gould. And Carolyn, if you can get that. They're working on, okay, so just a little background. We've been working with Fargo Youth Baseball. They've done a great job of combining Fargo Babe Ruth and Fargo Little League and the Fargo Youth Baseball and getting everybody under one roof. They've We've got cooperative partnerships down at Brunsdale Field and now at the Little League Complex south of South High. Over the past year, they've since moved into larger baseball fields for the 13 and over group, which are the 60-foot 6-inch base pitching and 90-foot bases. And as part of that one is the Starion Complex, and they've done a great job out there with turf infield. They've relocated a restroom concession building from the West Softball Complex over there, added grandstands, done some new fencing. So this latest request, and as part of that, they've also submitted a 5-year capital plan that we've met with the staff, and we do have a meeting this afternoon with Alex to review that. This was one that kind of just happened due to some circumstances in the construction industry, and have been able to hopefully take advantage of some savings in cost. So what they've approached the Park District with is, as part of the Starion Field Complex, they would like to construct a clubhouse there for players' storage. What other type of items would that be, Alex?
Basically there's a clubhouse for the players, and then there's a coach's office for them.
Okay, and that's 40 by 40, correct?
Correct.
So right now we've shown it, that is the very southwest corner of that southeast parking lot, which is on the left field side of the Starion Field. There you can see the Starion Field, so it'll just be that southwest corner right there. And as I said, they're looking to take some advantage of some construction savings. I think the big part of this, and which is good news for the Park District, is they're not looking at any cost sharing of funding. They have all their funding lined up. They're basically looking for permission from the Park District. As part of their original agreement for Starion Field, they've listed some of their items that they're looking to construct out there, which is the turf infield with fencing, the grandstand, relocating the concession restroom building. Then it says other miscellaneous amenities. And we just felt that, if they're adding batting cages or something, that's something the staff can handle, or minor things like that. But with the addition of a building out there, we just thought we better bring that to the facilities committee and the full board. Since this is a large item, again, they're not asking for any money from the Park District. It would totally be on their dime. I think it's a great addition out there within the restrictions of their agreement. The one thing I touched base with Alex a little yesterday, and they show it in the parking lot right now. I know parking is premium out there, and I drove out there to look, but I didn't know if they could slide that to the west between the curb line and the parking lot, the exterior fence, and then they got some batting cages out there. If we could slide that in just to save some parking is kind of one of my questions for them. So I don't know if you guys have talked about that, but that's one thing I thought about. I think it takes up maybe 4 stalls there, and then if they had some additional 1 or 2 ADA parking to be added, it might take a couple parking spots. But so I'll turn it over to you, Alex. If you want to.
Yeah, no, thanks for allowing us to come present. As you can see, I brought the A team with me. Jeff Gould, president of Postal 100 Baseball, and Ryan Satch, one of our board members. Ryan's also the project manager for this, and I do want to kind of go back and mention that that this is not just a Fargo Youth Baseball request. It's a collaborative effort with Postal 100. We value our partnerships a lot, and Postal 100 is one of our bigger partners, along with you guys at the Park District. And baseball is growing in this town, and so is the Postal 100 Legion program. And so there is currently, when you move that building from Anderson over to Starion Field, that allows for some players to use as a clubhouse. But because the numbers are growing, we're looking for additional room for these players to get ready for the name change and help. So I am going to turn over to Ryan, who is the project manager. He can talk more details on the clubhouse. We did look into what you requested, moving in a little bit more west, so there's been for some drain issues. So
there's some storm drain. I know there.
Yeah. So I'll let Ryan talk more details on the clubhouse.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that drove the location is site utilities and 807 feet for what we have to build up for flood stuff. So the current clubhouse that's there, we had to build that up like 4 to 5 feet. And so instead of it just taking out the blueprint that it is, we need all that room to taper to build up 45 feet and bring in all the fill and those types of things. So we had originally looked at putting it down the first base line, but after you factor in having to build it up 4 feet, moving site utilities, putting it in the parking lot from that corner, removes all those costs. And your question about moving it a little bit to the west there, as soon as you come off that parking lot, there's a storm drain right there, and it's about a 3-foot drop off. So then we go back to now we have to move those utilities and have to do civil engineering to kind of figure out a whole new storm drain thing and bring in fill to, I mean, it can be put anywhere out there, it's just a question of what it costs to put it where it is. And so the most economical cost and works for us operationally would be in that southwest corner. ADA-wise, our design team's telling us that there aren't any ADA issues because the other clubhouse is handicap accessible and provides all those capabilities. There aren't any restrooms in this building, so we won't have to adhere to anything there. The final review on the ADA stuff would happen on getting the city permit. And really the only thing that may have to happen is there might have to be a ramp to it, which would be easy to add. But parking spot wise, I'm told by people that are smarter than me that we don't need any handicap spots or anything added to it or any other.
Would there be any plumbing, sanitary, or anything in this building? No. Do you need to go with the full footings, or can you do a thickened slab or slab? Like a drive?
They're planning on doing, so not as he calls me project engineer, which is an overstatement, but I know enough to be dangerous on it. I can get you that exact answer, but they're basically building it up in the parking lot so that it would be at 807 feet. So I don't know if it's on a slab or how they're doing that. There would be steps going into it.
Plumbing or anything yet?
No plumbing.
Footings or not?
Just electrical. It's basically, it's a clubhouse. Our goal is to make sure that every kid has a locker. You know, as we ask the kids, what do you want? The theme really is around the clubhouse. They love to have their own locker. They love to have stuff before and after the games and that type of thing. So this year, post 400 easily could have 4 teams. So in partnership with Fargo Youth Baseball, we have basically a team to Fargo Youth Baseball, just because of space and things of that nature. So the clubhouse that we currently have will host 3 teams, and this clubhouse will host another 2 or 3. So it would definitely help them with growth in the future.
So you got to go in the original building for 2 or 3 teams?
You can get how we've got it finagled, which is probably not the greatest way. We sure aren't going to have them in there this year with this, but you can probably get about 38 lockers in there right now. But when you have 45, 46 kids, it's kind of.
Yeah, the existing clubhouse is pretty tight. So this is Vicky. I had just a couple questions. One of the concerns that was raised was parking spaces, and I've obviously been to that parking lot many, many times, and while I might have to walk a little farther from a further spot, I don't know that I've ever seen it full. Does it actually get full?
I've never seen it full.
Okay.
I've seen it pretty close, but I've never seen it to the point where people don't have a spot.
Yep. Yeah. And so how many spots do you think the building would impact? Half a dozen?
If that, I think it's like 4 or 5 spots.
And Ryan, on the east side of the building, there's no entrance on the east side of the building. Would that be correct?
There would be an entrance on the north side of the building. And there would be a kind of an exit on the west side of the building, so the players could go straight out to the field or to the batting cages.
Yep. So technically, you could park your buses or the van or even private parking. You know, any parking spots could be directly on the east side. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So it probably would have very minimal impact on the parking piece. Yeah, I think this is a win for a lot of people.
Dave, is there parking lot looking at off of 23rd still?
Well, and the city's still doing what Kevin's talking about, is that parking lot up on 23rd and 42nd. So the city's still doing their parking study on widening 23rd. So we're still unsure about that one. And I was just looking at this overall, right? I mean, just throwing this out there. I mean, would setting right here be an option, or I'm just getting that's too far away, or?
We looked at it, and that's a really actually low spot right there. So we have to build that spot up. And the problem with it is the 40 by 40 blueprint, the building fits there. So when you have to build it up 3 feet, you don't have the room to do it. We've tried down basically everything down the first baseline. We've tried behind home plate. We've tried everything.
Just north of F2, Dave, too.
Can you guys tell us where Dave was Dave, where were you asking about?
Looking on the very northwest corner of the parking lot, between the parking lot and one of the interior roads there. I just thought it would be close to your regular clubhouse. I sort of flat there.
So I'm assuming you guys found the pavement, looked at all the options, and this is the best one you could come up with.
Yeah, there's about 6 options there that we looked at, and this is the best one we could come up with. Some of them, most of them what happens is that asphalt road goes down the middle there, and what it does is it just makes it so that we don't have the room tapered up 3 or 4 feet depending on the spot. We just don't have the room to do it.
Gotcha.
So Dave, is this, would this be a situation where Fargo Youth Baseball / Post 400 own the building and we lease the land to them? Similar to other situations?
Yeah, and I would have to go back to the lease agreement. I mean, typically, the groups will build the building, and then if they were ever to vacate it, then it would become the property of the park district, but they would carry insurance and everything on it.
Sure. So similar to curling club, H.A. Thompson, that kind of attic.
So I got a question for Alex. What kind of programming are you looking at doing at Starion this fall, or in the fall period? Because, with that parking lot, I get that I'm all for the expansion of baseball and making baseball better. I get concerned with taking over parking stalls because we got our flag football program out there. Yes, we can use some of the parking between Southwest and the curling club. We use Anderson for practice. So it's a concern of mine moving forward with that parking lot.
From a baseball standpoint, typically we don't really do anything regarding baseball with that age group out there in the fall time. The ball yard, they would be the only one that runs for their fall league program. But also, if I remember correctly, a lot of people park on that street right across from the zoo.
And I don't know if they're going to do anything with that road, 23rd.
We still don't know. But I know
the other thing
during flag football,
the other thing too, I think flag football, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the ball yard, when they do stuff at Starion Field or Teamsters or whatever, the artist formerly known as No Name is Now Howling or whatever, the ball yard's only on those fields on Sunday afternoon, which I don't believe the Park District has Sunday afternoon flag football. Has changed since my sons were two of the worst players in the history of the league, so okay.
But they're ball.
They like baseball. They should stay with baseball.
So, do we use Starion for flag football?
No, because it infringes, the outfield infringes on the active field, which is fine because we use Anderson. So we need the lights is where it comes into play.
I don't have any issues with it. Do we need to bring it forward to the full board for approval? I don't think so. I think it's great. Fargo Youth Baseball's done, and Post 400 done great things in the community, and they keep going forward. So I don't want to put any brakes on this project.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. I just couldn't tell if you're working because typically you're retired.
I dressed up for today.
It's just too bad we didn't have you lower on the agenda so you'd have to sit through more.
It's like a Microsoft.
We're a little gun shy to readdressing agreements at this point.
There's no covenants on this.
That first part was just like a Microsoft meeting, I'm telling you.
Thanks, everyone.
Nothing worse than you gotta get people involved.
Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for all you're doing.
Thanks, guys.
See you, Jack. See you, Rod.
Stay safe. See ya. See ya.
All right, paring this time right down.
Number 3.
So number 3, let me find my memo. Oh, it's right there. All right, I'll just redirect it from that since Tara and I did such a great job crafting it along with Phyllis and Stacy. So the Park District has received a request from Phyllis Melby, a former Park Board Commissioner, to honor Roger Gress, easy for me to say, for his years of service to the Park District by renaming the Northside Recreational Outdoor Pool in his honor. Included with this memo is a narrative provided by past Commissioner Melby and current Commissioner Griggs. We've also included some past historical documentation regarding accomplishments and achievements related to the tenure of retired Executive Director Cress, including a one-page bio. So we did include that for all the commissioners to review. We also included, I sent out kind of our memorial policy, which we crafted here 4 to 5 to 7, 8 years ago, about naming of memorials in part our memorial benches, our memorial trees, but also it includes renaming of parks. And while this wouldn't be a memorial, it kind of follows some of the guidelines on past achievements and service to the district. So I'll kind of leave it from there and turn it over to Commissioner Griggs.
Well, like I said, Phyllis called me over a year ago and had this idea. I talked to Bart Johnson as well, and then I talked to Roger directly, and he regaled me with stories of riding his bike to the Harry Holland Pool, which was on the north side. And he was originally a bit hesitant. I think just having the idea of having his name on something like that and being part of the Park District for as long as he was and understanding the, the importance of a renaming of that, a dedication of that level. And so we talked for quite a while about it. And he eventually kind of came around and was happy with the idea. So I apologize for not coming forward sooner, but life gets in the way sometimes.
So talk him into submission. He usually does that to other people.
Well, there you go. I think I had him off base a little bit. Anyway, that's basically it. It's not a memorial, so it doesn't really fit in that way. He is still with us, and he can appreciate the facility in his name should we make that decision. And it's a good legacy to move forward. Sometimes I think we need to remember stepping stones as we go.
So with that agreement with pool, we need to look at having school board approval on this. I don't think so.
We operate the pool on their property, so it's our operation.
So what does this actually look like? Are we putting up a giant sign? Is it going to be, what does this actually look like? How does this work? Who pays for it? Whatever other logistics we might need to know.
I could envision a statue with the Speedo of Roger. Zuba's at a
Yeah, we could probably vote on that right now, and I bet Roger would like to vote as well.
So just looking at the memorial policy, and I would guess the Park District would pay for signage and renaming. I don't see right now a statue of anything being constructed as much as I like Roger. But it does say as part of the larger memorials, staff will present the request and related information to the facility committee on at least 2 occasions. At the first meeting, the committee will discuss memorials and its relative merits. The facility committee may have the requesting party or staff provide additional information. At the next facility committee meeting, staff will provide any additional information as requested. The facility committee, with or without its recommended action, will place proposed, we won't say memorial, proposed renaming on the next regular agenda of the Board of Park Commissioners. So if we were to move this on to the June facility committee meeting, it would be up for discussion at the July commission meeting.
Right. And I'm anything on the signage, anything outside our normal signage. It would be our typical park district sign that says rest pool, or however whatever.
Sure, so no different than the John C. Carlson Coliseum and the Shirling Sports Complex, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So, you know, while we're here and we're looking at this policy for memorials, so Dave, would it be safe to say we don't have a policy for dedications?
That'd probably be safe to say.
So would it make sense to revise this to cover both? And of course, you know, I do not mean this towards Roger at all, but there's always concern with naming something after a person who's still alive. Not that I expect Roger to go forward and do anything, and I'm not using him as an example by any means, but when someone is still around, there's always there's a potential concern for future things that could arise. I'm just putting that out there. I'm not saying that sits in this case, but I do think that if we're going to use this policy for memorials as our guide, we should make it for memorials and dedications, or have a separate one for dedications that we can follow.
I would agree.
Now, with that said, I do agree with this plan. I think this is a great idea. I just think we have to figure out how we can go from point A to the end point in the right process.
So do we need the dedication part of the policy written first, and then we come back and?
Well, I mean, I think, like I said, I'm no attorney, but I would assume you could just count this as your first presentation, and between now and the next facility committee meeting, we could add a dedication line in there and use that as the second dedication and approve it July.
Well, and technically, if this is the memorial policy, it doesn't apply here. So we don't even need the first and second. Not that I'm saying we shouldn't just follow kind of the same path. But I do think this would count as your first presentation anyway, if you were using this policy as your guide. I mean, this is what we're doing. We're doing exactly what number 2 says.
Yeah, I think we could look at it simultaneously though, and get the policy updated.
And would it have to be 2 different policies, or could it just be a memorial/honorarium?
I would like that.
Yeah, I think it can be one. I haven't read through every word in here, but there might be something that just, we might want to just double check. It talks about the sadly departed or something.
And you have A, larger memorials, B, smaller memorials, and you could have C, part of dedication.
There you go.
So, bring this, I guess you could bring this back to facilities next month, and in the meantime, or concurrently to that, could you come back with a recommendation of how you're gonna do signage, you know, have somebody take some time to think about it, whether it's, you know, a plaque or it's gonna be, you know, some, I don't even know. I'll let that to the experts.
We'll have Roger brought up since he's got artistic ability.
There you go.
You can make it.
So if we are following this, I think, and I'm assuming Stacy, you're the one taking the lead on this, that following the memorial criteria would be what you probably want to make sure you've got in order. That one, there's a list of criteria 1 through 10. And some of these obviously you've already done.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could surmise, you know, all that documentation into, you know, a list of 5 points.
Right. Make up a talking points list.
Yeah.
Thank you for collecting all of that information.
Oh, that wasn't me. That was one request to Miss Nancy Cress that had all that. She's his biggest fan.
Only.
Only family.
No, I'll put together a summary for the next meeting and field any questions anyone may have.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We wrap that item up.
Sounds good.
All right, Officer Marvig, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
All right, you've been so quiet. All right, our next item is item number 4, review, and this is more housekeeping. Review 2019-2020 Fargo Wildlife Management Program and request for continuation for 2021 season. Officer Marvig, you are up.
Okay. Pretty basic here. A couple adoptions here, changes. It has been passed by the city commission or approved. Lieutenant Sanders did that from the police department side. There's the ordinances there, the review of the last year, some of the historical stats since it started in 2006. We did not take any criminal investigations, so no complaints last year of wanton waste, people shooting deer and leaving them, or baiting or anything like that. We do some random checks, didn't find any violations. In the spring here, I did take a few reports of people not getting their deer stands down on time. So I had 3 warnings for that, and then 1 person who used screwed-in steps where they actually put them into the tree. But overall, pretty minor things for what we're considering. No major conflicts between residents and hunters again this year, which is great to see. The 4th document there is a new one that Dave Beats and I worked together with the city's GIS to put together. This year we had quite a few questions about, like, where does Forest River Park and where does Orchard Glen end as far as hunting goes. And so we put this map together with GIS to just define that for the hunter. So this is available on the urban hunting website, on the City of Fargo's website. It doesn't define the park limits because those parks run into each other with some private properties in between. We just want to be clearly defined that you will not hunt outside of these areas to give those neighbors there some reprieve and keep them away from residential housing. And then the other new thing is with COVID going on, Lieutenant Sanders came up with a way to do online training for the majority of it. However, we will still be using Metro Rec to do proficiency testing with social distancing in place, limited people, different days. So we're working together on that. Questions on any of that?
None here. I don't believe we have any questions. Josh, good job on that, and Beats constructing those maps. So if I don't hear anything, we'll move that on to the June board meeting for consideration to approve. Yeah, all right, Josh, thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, next item. We have item number 5, discuss agreement between the Fargo Park District and WDAY / Forum Communications regarding FM Trail Builders request. I don't know if we can get that up there, Carolyn. So right now we've had a good partnership over the last 2 to 3 years with the FM Trail Builders. They're a local user group that mountain biking, and they came to us a couple years ago and wanted to construct single track trails. And the park district, our staff are not the experts on the fall lines, erosion type things. So they're the local expert group, and we've had a great partnership with them down at Island Park, and they've gone south of Island Park, and they've gone north of Island Park, all the way to the Windmill House right now. And in working with the group, the city of Fargo has currently taken ownership of that Windmill House. It hasn't been demoed yet, but eventually it will. And you can see right there is the WDAY property. Just to the south the coulee going through there is a Rose Creek coulee, so right now we have our conservation park there, Lions Conservancy Park, and when we get a hold of that windmill house, the trail will be able to continue up through our park property. They'll probably have to exit out onto the street, get on the bike trail, and then get back onto the WDAY property, which is highlighted in red. The blue line highlights the entire WDAY forum communication property. But working with their legal counsel, and they reviewed our agreement, which is very similar to what we have with Catholic Health Initiatives, just to South 52nd Avenue. They just wanted us they wanted us only to be on the west side of the levee. So I redrew that red line on the west side of the levee right there. Yeah, right in there. So that is the area where the FM trail builders would be able to construct their trails. And the good thing about the FM trail builders, while they construct single track bike trails, these trails can be used for walkers and birders, so it's kind of a joint use trail. They've done some trails down in our southern, I don't know if they have, if Dave Beats on the line yet or not, if they constructed trails down in Orchard Glen, Riverwood, and Heritage Hills, or they plan to do so, but they do a nice job constructing the trails and then maintaining the trails. So we haven't had any issues with them. They also have trails over in Moorhead.
So is the proposed trail the red line?
No, the proposed trail is just the property line. Originally, when I sent it over to Forum Communications to get their legals team to look at it, this is just the city of Fargo's GIS map. So the blue line goes all the way around, highlights this property. And that's what I originally sent over, and then they just came back, the only change they wanted to do was they wanted to take out this part for any trail use, which they're of course not going to use because it's flat and open. So I just redrew with the software the line just inside that blue line, so they would be limited to this area for their trails. You know, so they eventually come up, once they come to the windmill house, they would come up to the Lions Park. They probably have a trail that would get them out to crossing right here, and then they get back on. Unless they construct some type of swinging bridge to get across that coulee, or in the wintertime maybe you can cross it when the ice is frozen. But
So on Sunday we were out on the bikes, and we pulled off into the windmill house, and then there was a trail. A ways south of the trail, is that a biking trail?
That's a single track trail heading south to Iowa Park.
It looked like it was going north out of, because there's a little parking lot right to the north of the windmill house. There's a trail on the north end of that.
Oh, it could be maybe, they might have got permission from that windmill house to cross that property, so maybe they do get up into Lions Conservancy Park.
Yeah, this is Dave. We do have them going just to the north of that, because we did pass that agreement a while back with the city of Fargo to use the windmill house and those couple of lots they bought out. So their trails right now do exist almost right to the coulee.
And Dave, you can go south Island Park on that trail too, on your bike?
Correct.
Past 52nd, down across the Catholic Health Initiatives, and you go through the city parcels all the way up to where it stops at Hector's property, where that old trailer court used to be. So they got a pretty extensive trail system over there.
I'll have to be more aggressive on my search.
So I mean, they've done a great job for us. I don't think we've had any issues with the FM trail builders. As I said, they construct the trails, and they don't mind if people are walking them or using them for birding or anything. So it basically and the way we've done it is the park district will hold the agreements with these private entities, 501c3s, and then we just have a standard agreement with FM trail builders, and they operate under us. So they still carry their insurances and everything.
Great partnership.
So move to consider.
Paul, wake up, you're next.
I'm ready. All right, Paul, I'm writing my notes, so I'll just turn it over to you.
Commissioners, Valley Senior Services operates public transportation in 6 counties in southeastern North Dakota. And occasionally we have to replace vehicles that have reached their useful life 4 miles. And because of that, DOT requires a resolution. Is that where I'm at? Is that 6? Or is that the?
Yep, since resolution.
Okay, sorry. That they require a resolution approved by the board that allows me to apply for funding, excuse me, to replace these vehicles. So it's federal funding that I'll apply for. We'd like to replace 3 vehicles that we currently use, one steel, one cast, one Starion Complex. And this resolution will give me permission to move ahead with that funding request. And hopefully we will be awarded that funding and replace those vehicles. Similar to the resolution you approved in March for our operating. Thank you.
No questions? All right, we'll move down onto the full board. Paul, you were up for number 7, review revisions to DSS drug and alcohol policy.
Thank you. The drug and alcohol policy we have in place currently is for our transit operations in a lot of counties. And DOT requires that policy be reviewed every 3 years. So we're up for that again, and there's also been a little bit, I changed the format of it. We've adopted the Department of Transportation's format, so the content is still the same, but the format has changed. And we were required to have one word to the policy, and that word is, you'll see it on page 8, is opioids. Just to have a more common name for that because of the problems that people are having with that drug right now. So that's the only change to the policy except the formatting, and I need it to be reviewed every 3 years. And at the meeting right now, I'd be happy to answer any questions about that policy and any particulars of it if you have any. So I'm just looking for a review of it.
Questions for me?
Have you ever had to use policy on any of your drivers? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
not very many, I hope.
No, unfortunately, I think, the age of the drivers that we have, they're really over the age of getting in trouble with those substances. So, we have been very fortunate. People do it.
Thanks, Paul. That's good to go. All right, we'll move that on to the full board for consideration. Thank you, Paul. Those items, you can be excused.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're clicking now. All right, next item, number 8, is review and discuss lease agreement with Chisholm Housing. I'll turn this over to Kevin Bowe.
All right, since we're handling a lot of the agreements that Marcy Brush and Sean and Becky have gone through, they're pretty much through, I think, the letter R, as far as getting all those agreements online and cleaning a lot of that stuff up. So being on the board for the Boys and Girls Club, it was brought up kind of at the board meeting, and I just went, I think we have some say in this. So Chisholm is going to be no longer, they're merging with the Boys and Girls Club, effective June of this year.
Charism.
Sorry. So all their after-school programs, summer programs, the entire organization will be under the Boys and Girls Club located at the old church on 18th and then down at Rose Creek. So, Charism was really in that neighborhood to serve the families and kids for programming. But that now will fall under the Charism, or Boys and Girls Club. So with the merger of Charism, to the Boys and Girls Club, we need to update the agreement there's a sample agreement or a draft agreement in working with Thad from the Nillis Law Firm to update that. I do have one change on the agreement. The Chisholm Group, which operates the community homes, wants to, instead of a 30-year lease, go year to year with a 3-month termination. Dave and I have met with these groups on several occasions. For us, it's really no significance whether it's 30-year or a year to year. I mean, it's our property. We're also working with the Growing Together group for the garden plots that are at McCormick. park as well as the ones that were bonus, to have them under one location in the growing together group. So they'll still provide the meals for those community apartments that are there 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. So we just need to update the agreement. The only really change in the agreement obviously is it's no longer with Terrorism, it's with Chisholm. And then as far as the dollar calendar year rent, I think we were fine with that. As far as the maintenance, we handle basically the outside of the building. They handle everything on the inside. If they do make any modifications to the building, they need to provide us with notification of that and certified professionals that are doing the work. So with that, if you got any questions, or Dave, you got any?
Yeah, and as Kevin said, previously we had these agreements, we've been approached to offer gardens for different groups around town. And when they were just getting started out, we wanted to make sure they basically ran under a parent company. So the Growing Together's garden was under Charism because they were going to be the parent company. And then they were operating out of Urbanus under, I believe it was Luther Social Services. And, with Jack Wood, I think he's done a great job as a group, and Chisholm really doesn't want to deal with the gardeners. So I think Jack's got a pretty good history with us. While they don't run the gardens at Madison, they help them out. So I think as part of this, we take, the gardeners out from under this agreement, and we just work with Jack and put together our own agreement with them. They kind of just been off on their own. They do a great job. So we don't have any worries anymore where we need a parent company to oversee us. Just an FYI.
Jack's fine with that too.
Yep.
Yeah, Chad's working on that agreement as well. So.
I would say if another garden group came to the park district that wasn't associated with Jack, we might try to put them under another parent company again, but I think Jack and his group just proven their values.
Sounds good.
So we'll move that one on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Next item is review amendment to the lease at the Edgewood Tavern. Carol.
Commissioners, in your packet, there is a draft of an amendment to the Edgewood Tavern lease. The current lease requires the tenant to pay for Wi-Fi service independent of the Wi-Fi service that we have out there. And it's one of those things they researched what it would take to bring in a separate independent service, and it was very expensive. So they requested the opportunity to share a service with the Fargo Park District. And what they would agree to do is to pay for all the setup fees that would take to get that network going. The recurring cost would be 50-50 split, because again, what we basically did was take the current service and double it. So it is an equal 50-50. We still need our service in the winter time, so it was not something that we would go and use the current lease arrangement, which was 75-25, based on how the golf course would be closed in the winter time. So that's why, again, staff recommends 50-50. And then any expenses that requires the managed service provider to come on site for them specifically, they will get billed. And again, we checked to make sure there wasn't any issues with them utilizing our contract and us billing out from that for this as well. And then the terms for billing would be the same as the current lease, and everything would be rolled in with the monthly charges that we end up billing them for.
Carolyn, who's the service provider up there?
We have Midco, and then our corporate tech is, but Midco is the ones that are out there.
When you share 50-50, are we on the same network?
It's going to be split where they're going to have their private piece of the pie, and we're going to have our private piece of the pie.
So there's no commingling of?
No. And then part of it too is because of that, we have a separate firewall, and we have an access point for them that's separate, and they're paying for that equipment as part of the rental as well.
Yeah, I just didn't want commingling of a network.
Correct.
Without, proper
Yeah.
security protocols.
Any questions?
As long as we have that security in place, that's fine.
Okay. Then we'll move that to the board meeting.
Yep. Next item, discussion of proposed golf fees for 2021. This is kind of the initial start of the 2021 budget process. Carolyn.
As Dave said, with our budget process, each year we look at fees. This year with COVID, golf has had some effect, but not nearly the same effect as other park district programs and activities. And so, again, based on the process we used before, Tyson looked at the CPI and it's 1.2%. And so what the golf group would be asking for is to increase our fees across the board 1.2%. And again, based on previous commissioner's request that the adjustments be rounded to the nearest 0 or 5. And that's represented in the table that was included in the packet. The staff would also like to, at the end of this year, sit down and look at the impact of COVID and how that affected fee purchases or purchases of passes. And again, maybe look at some additional standards and changes that way. But for right now, on budgeting purposes, we just want to do the 1.2% across the board.
How are passes going? Are we selling tickets?
We are way up on passes, and so that's why the staff would like to look at that effect and try to evaluate if moving forward, we will continue to have that level of passes and if the passes are priced appropriately. Okay. Because right now, the golf staff has said that they're looking at 75% of their rounds being passes, where in past years it's closer to 50 or 55%.
So we might be cheap.
Right, we might be. And so again, looking at that in September, and again, making any recommendations or having discussions at that time. It's too early right now. So can we move that forward as well?
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, item number 11 is, we talked about this a little bit in the past, and it's kind of been, working with the different user groups, that we want to have some type of, I guess, request process for the user groups who want to get a project discussed with staff, and then if there's any funding requirements, get that incorporated into our long-range plan. And I think, as I've mentioned in the past, we've had an informal process that's worked for the years I've been here, over the 20 years, and I think it just maybe took a little step backwards over this last couple of years, but I think we're doing a good job of getting things back in place. Kevin has done a good job of putting a request form in place, and we do have this on our website, of where groups, say Fargo baseball, Fargo youth baseball, can make a request, maybe do an improvement to a field. I'm throwing it out there, it's something that I just made up. Say they want another Astro or another artificial turf infield that's $400,000, and they come to the park district and say, hey, we can raise $200,000 if you can raise another $200,000. So they put this down on basically a long-range capital form. It comes to the park district. What we would do is receive their request, let them know that staff will review it. We'll ask any questions like, is this something the park district needs? Is it something that's good for the public? I mean, if we thought it was a good deal, we'd say, yeah, we're willing to spend $200,000. We would put that in our long-range planning guide. And maybe, was it something we want the next 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, put it on that. And then as that process moves forward, then it gets, the board gets their shot at it when we talk about the long-range plan in the spring for future funding opportunities. And at that point, either the board says, yes, that's a great idea, or, no, we're not going to do it this year, let's push it out here. And that's kind of the process we've done in the past. And I think right now, it just maybe what we're talking about is formalizing the request process or the application. So,
yeah, so right now it's online. It's a fillable form, really. It mimics what our capital request forms are right now. So if we're out in the public, whether staff or commissioners, and they get asked, hey, would you consider doing this? You can automatically say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Well, they might take that as we're moving ahead with that, or, hey, you can go to the website, just like the foundation one, and put that request in. That kicks off. The email goes to Tyson. He's the one that'll house it, and then he'll kick it off to make sure it's on the list for the capital conversations as we move forward. It is a little bit buried in the website, and that is really because we didn't want to invest a lot of money into creating another page, Carolyn, or however it is.
With the change in the website redesign,
Yeah, it'll be
it will
more.
be better come November.
It'll be more visible, whether it's for the foundation or for a capital project. So we didn't want to invest a lot of money to knowing that we're going to go ahead with this in November. So we need to make it very simple. The research that I did with other entities, whether it's city or park districts, seem to be pretty consistent with what we're looking at. So,
I mean, I think the big thing is we want them to come through the staff first and vet it, because I mean, we might get some crazy idea where somebody says, well, we got $1 million for the park district to match $1 million, and we want to build, like a large equipment playground that says you come out here and use backhoes, dozers, and whatever, but the park district is willing to throw $1 million. Well, staff-wise, we like, it has nothing to do with kids, it's really not our mission. We don't even think this is going to make it to the level of our capital plan. But that's what we want to get the first shot at it and say, hey, yeah, this is a good idea, and that's what we do. And I think everybody is in support of having staff review it first, but then we get those on those lists for the long-range capital plan, and then the commissioners get to actually look at it and say, yeah, this is a good idea, what's the schedule for funding? So anyway, we want to kind of bring this as our kind of our first shot at it and see what you guys thought.
We could vet that out, like Dave talked about. If somebody was to bring up the dog park in Island Park, yes, we would come back and put some notes together and say, maybe this is not a good idea from staff standpoint.
So the ideas that do come up that you aren't necessarily fit within the plan, is that something you share with the board as well as to say, you know?
Well, I think we would have a list of all the requests that have been submitted, and if for some reason also, you know, three commissioners say, you guys are crazy, this is a great plan, you know, then you can revisit that.
Or if somebody in the community says they submitted this fabulous plan.
Yeah, we have a list of requests as well. So.
Yeah, we don't.
And I think we put the ones on there that we think fit within our mission and funding and schedule, and then, you know, we have those, they're all submitted. We let the people know that, you know, this really doesn't fit within our mission and our plans. And then they, of course, they can always bring it up to the commissioners.
I think this looks great, and it formalizes the process, and so instead of having stuff random all over here, there, and everywhere, we point our community to this when they have an idea that they want our district to consider. The one thing that Brian talked about that I'd like to see us work on too is the internal process. He's mentioned a handful of times, he goes, I don't know where it goes after I submit it. And so there's some way that maybe it's picks up the phone on a Tuesday and calls and says, where is our proposal? You know, whatever that is or whatever that means, it's just his frustration is he never knew where it was at. And so how we define that in the process so we can be consistent on where requests sit, I think that's equally important.
Well, and I think, Jerry, to your point, and I don't want to throw anybody in the bus, we don't know of those conversations that were had with, you know, did they talk to Joel, or, you know, did he call them back, or was it left up to us? So there was definitely a drop in communication aspect. So I think once those are submitted and reviewed by the commissioners, whether it's moving ahead or no, it's not part of our mission. It's our responsibility to make sure that we hold those people back and let them know the status of that category.
Yeah, and that's the biggest part of it. I mean, because no matter how well you educate somebody, their first line is to talk to an elected official. If somebody approaches you, we just ask any commissioner that says, have you talked to the staff? I know there's a form on this. Talk to Dave, get it to me, and then we'll get it to the proper directors, and yeah, we'll do that follow-up. So, yeah, I think, there was just some lots of communication over the last couple of years. We just need to get it back in line. I mean, I think it's gone well, but, Ryan, they came to us, they got the funding for a clubhouse, and that was something with no funding requested. It's something you could, expedite. So, and we jumped through a couple of hoops, and we had some questions out there. We got them answered and moved on. So, if you guys are good with that, we'll move on forward.
We need to bring that to the board. Or we want to just update. I mean, it's open.
You guys.
I think you could just have it in your director's report of this is the don't you think?
Yep.
This is the process. I don't think we have to vote on how it's just that there is a process and we agree to it.
Okay, good idea, John.
And if you got suggestions, and you go on there and look at it, absolutely.
So when there just going down the road, if let's say we've got 15 requests sitting there, is there a SharePoint file where you guys have them and it says, gone to committee, so you kind of have like a status, receive request. And if that's all it says, then we know it hasn't gone any further. So if somebody says, what happened here, or we go on and look, oh yeah, they received it, but it's gone to committee.
Yeah, we received it and just reviewed with them that this doesn't fall on our mission or something like that.
I mean, it's a communication piece that would, kind of keep everybody in the loop.
It's similar to what we're doing with programs and facilities right now on SharePoint, so people can see it.
You don't have to have a lot of detail. I mean, I wouldn't put summary.
Right.
Kevin thinks this is a terrible idea, but Dave loves it, so we're in.
That goes right back to what I was saying.
Yeah.
Because where's that?
And it's an easy piece, it would just standardized. I would not, you could only have like 5 choices of what you could put there. So.
Right on. You can do that. Next item is review offer for RDJ building. This has been kicked around, for several years here. I know Jim Larson was working with the county when he was here, so it's obviously been out there for 2 to 3 years. And I think in talks with the sports complex, we talked about, do we still need this facility? If we move our offices, we can consolidate all of our staff. Maybe it's just time that, maybe we liquidate the facility. So the initial thoughts of that were with the county. And we did have an appraisal done on the facility. The appraisal listed out at $950,000. And that was done in 2018. We also, and this was part of some of Jim's conversation with the county, was our building costs and improvements. And just some of the items on here, which purchase of the building was $165, elevator improvements $315, land for the parking lot, we purchased a house and demoed the house for $64,000, a new roof system $36,000, and then 6 years of window improvements. And all these improvements total out to about $750,000. So we have had some initial conversations with just the staff at the county. And recently, we are under some constraints on how we liquidate or sell property. Typically, put it up for a bid. So knowing that the county has some expansion needs in the future, we were asking our legal counsel, is there any way, between government entities that you can just have a sale between 2 government entities? And what I think it came down to was the city of Fargo's, since we don't have an ordinance related to that, we would fall back under the city's ordinance. And they have an ordinance that they would have to amend a little bit that would allow this to happen. So Eric Johnson over the city, Bruce Scrub of the city, is in favor of making this change to the ordinance, so there's just a process they have to go through to change this ordinance that allows sale of 2 properties between government entities. So we're still working on that, but we have had some discussions with the county administration over there, and they have taken it to their county commission. They have some different thoughts on what the building's worth. In our discussion, as I said, we said we have an appraisal for $950, our improvements are $750. To me, somewhere in the middle is where you would fall, you know, between 2 government entities, they're friends of each other's. They did let us know that their initial offer price is $600,000. So I guess we're just presenting that to our facilities committee meeting for any discussion, or is there a counter offer? Do we move forward any more on it with discussions with the county? So that's kind of where we are right now. And, you know, we've kind of had some discussions on, you know, if you just look on a personal level, if I bought a house for $100,000, I made $50,000 worth of improvements. Is it just worth $150, or if the market says it's worth $200, what's it really worth? I think Jerry made that point. So a little bit for discussion. And not, you know, we've had appraisals go south too, so whether you get $950 or you get less or more, I don't know.
So if we sold it on the open market, and we'd have to give them compensation for that parking lot, right? That would.
Well, I believe, you know, I talked with the civil engineer on what the depreciation of a parking lot of that nature would be. And I believe it's 15 years old. So realistically, that's probably the life of a parking lot like that, or maybe a 20-year lifespan on an asphalt parking lot. It's in very good shape. But so really you might be paying, you know, if it's 20-year life and 15%, you might pay 25% of what the original value was. You might have to pay back.
Was that the agreement when they put the parking lot in? Because it's our property, but they get the property, the parking lot.
I don't know if there was ever an end game agreement of if either the county or the park district would back out the agreement. It was basically that the park district would purchase the house, demo the home, the county would build the parking lot, and we'd share it. And there was no, what if somebody ends the agreement? So, I mean, is somebody have to reimburse somebody for the other person's cost? So I'm guessing we got to reimburse the person.
But we just, you know, with the baseball, we just said that if something changed and they constructed this clubhouse and they left, we keep the clubhouse. They pay for it.
Yep. And I think so if the county backed out the agreement, you're saying they would just revert back to us.
It's like our parking lot. They made improvements.
But I don't know if they're wantingly. You know, if we were to sell it, we're going to sell it to the new owner, so they'd be losing rights to it. We're not, if they just said we're walking away from it, we'd probably become ours. But I think we're basically selling it, so we'd have to reimburse them for any costs associated with construction. That's my take. Like I said, I still put all day last night. That's what it is.
It'd be the same if we sold the whole Starion Complex. We sold it to a commercial developer, we'd have to make part of the baseball whole.
Yeah, we'd have to pay them for their improvements. Appreciate it.
But what was that number? What did we lay on? So you'd have to take the sale price and reduce that by however much we're going to get the county back.
Yeah, shoot, I had that.
We had that number, and I can't remember.
I think it was like probably a $75,000 parking lot construction costs. So we probably have to reimburse them for 25% of that 75. Is my take. You know, it's 20-year life. You reimburse them for the life left in at 25%. So about 15. Yeah. I think that's what trigger is 15.
Well, I think we take Chad Peterson's challenge and move forward. He goes, if we can sell it for $1 million, by God, go for it, and we should trumpet it. I think given it that 600,000, I don't know anything about the commercial market and the real estate market, but it would seem to me that we should get all of 600 plus.
And my thoughts are, I mean, you always want to be good neighbors and you want to find a happy medium, but to me, a happy medium is between 950 and 750.
I'm with Jerry. We don't need to go, you know, with the state that we're in now, we don't know what the timeline is on building a sports complex and consolidating all of the offices, so we have people there, and we have nowhere to put them. If we did sell it, we'd have to rent space back probably.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the benefits. If you didn't sell it to the county, they don't need to get in there right now, so we do have some offices that we can lease from them for the interim, plus there are also user groups in there.
And we're also not in a crunch for money at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, they're also, is that Human Services or Southeast Human Services in the basement? Red River, yeah.
With the activity center.
So, you know, so the county would allow them to stay in there and kind of find a new home. I mean, and that's one of the good things, and we also have some other renters there that, you know, they get very inexpensive rent that they would have time to find a new home. So that's one of the good things of if we were to sell to the county. So we just got to take that into consideration.
So what do you think, will you counter offer? When we talked to Chad and Mount Pleasure, I didn't get the sense, and Chad was pretty clear, he said, I got some commissioners, don't think it's worth more than $1. Yeah. And so I don't know if we counter offer, I don't know where that'd get us. We could.
Well, and like I said, I mean, I just think, I think there is value to having that building, so our current renters have a place for the interim. I mean, if we were to sell it and be out in 6 months, I mean, my house is gonna be, it is gonna look good. I know Red River Human Services are looking at building out by Romana Sand Volleyball Courts. So whether that would move out there, I don't know, but that's probably still a year away. So, I mean, like I said, that is a benefit to the county, but I mean, 600,000 is kind of a little off. And I don't know if you would sell it and terms are I don't know, I'm not a realtor, terms are a year to vacate or something, I don't know, or you just hold on to it for a while and sell it in a year, I don't know.
I think you have to decide what we need first, and then we go forward with whatever sale or discussion. Yeah.
I think we would need more than 600,000.
So what this, looking at the agreement here, it says the agreement and the easements granted hereunder shall be for the term of 25 years, commencing with the date of this agreement, which is 2003. It shall automatically renew for excessive periods of 5 years unless the party given written notice of the intent to terminate the agreement and at least 6 months prior to the expiration of the current term.
That's the agreement with the county?
Yep.
For the parking lot?
Yep. Parking lot, 11th Street, 3rd Avenue South. October 20th of 2003.
So what was the part about terminating?
6 months. Agreement and the easements granted hereunder shall be the term of 25 years commencing on the date of this agreement and shall thereafter be automatically renewed to successive periods of 5 years unless either party given written notice of the intent to terminate this agreement at least 6 months prior to the expiration of the current term.
So does that mean we could not terminate ahead of, 2028?
2028, you have to give it 6 months.
Yeah, but you'd have to wait till then, is the way I hear you say that.
That's the way you're doing.
No, I think you terminate, you just have to give it 10 months, 6 months notice, what you got.
Well, or at least 6 months prior to the expiration of the current term.
Prior, so you have to give 6 months notice. So if you gave a notice in June.
Yeah, prior to the expiration of the current term.
We could sell it or turn it over to the summer. That's the way I think.
Right, but the current term is 25 years.
But it says prior to the expiration of the current term.
It's like 5 years. So your current term is 5 years.
No, the first term is 25.
Yeah, the first term is 25.
Then after
You can terminate any agreement prior to the term, provided you give them proper notice.
Yeah, it says 6 months prior.
And then you might have to the expiration of the current term.
I don't know, I'm not kind of reading it the way.
I'm hearing that we have to wait till 6 months prior to the. We can double check.
We can check it with legal counsel.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know.
Client, you know,
Well, I don't say much on this, but I'm a little bit offended by the county where they did such a low program. Why do they think we should discount them? I mean, this is valuable asset that brings value, so. I mean, then, what Chad Peterson said, we still, there's no commissioners going over $1. Well, obviously, they probably don't want to bring that. So that's my take on it.
It's their advantage to take that property and not have someone else move in because it's part of the whole.
Yeah, well, if they were gonna expand some residential homes, it'd be a lot more than $600,000. So we get that confirmed, that or Andy.
So if we aren't interested, do we have to take this to the full board and then we'll to either accept the offer or not to accept the offer?
I mean, I think they took it to their full commission.
So they have made a formal offer of $600,000 for this property, so we have to reject it.
No counter or anything like that, just, no counter offer, just rejected.
Well, we can decide on the board. I think the full board can come back.
Move it to the full board for more discussion.
Yep. I'd be surprised, knowing our board. I don't think anyone would be in favor. Lucky 13, Diane.
So I'm presenting an update to the donation of annual leave policy, and this is directly related to the COVID situation. Right now, the Family First Corona Response, the FFCRA, allows for full-time employees to be paid out 80 hours if they are out for, there's 6 different reasons that they have listed, but if they are out and it is COVID related, those 80 hours are all that are mandated that we pay between April and December 31st. That, however, 80 hours may not cover one time that they may be out, and it certainly wouldn't cover if they're out more than once. And individuals are not only to be out if they're sick, but they're to be out if they're taking care of someone who is sick or if they're under in a self-isolation quarantine order. And after speaking with Fargo, Cass Public Health, the individuals who will be impacted the hardest are actually those individuals who are a close contact with someone who is sick. So if a spouse becomes ill, the employee is required to stay home while the spouse is sick, and then 14 days after that spouse has been released by their healthcare provider. And according to Cass County Public Health, there is no way to shorten that, even if they tested. It's just a point in time. You can test negative on Tuesday and still end up coming down with symptoms on Thursday. So it's very probable that there are individuals who are not only going to use those 80 hours from the FFCRA, they will also use any remaining sick hours that they have. And we are allowing them to use vacation hours, but to not go below 40, because there are things other than COVID that people might like to be out for. So people are going to end up not having enough time to cover, or potentially not having enough time to cover times that they need to be out related to COVID. And we do have a donation policy where other employees can donate to employees who are currently out of sick or vacation time. This is an update to that policy that would fall under the same amount of time. The updates would be for the time that the FFCRA is enacted, which is only through the end of the year. So these updates are only through the end of the year as of right now. But the changes are that employees, instead of full-time employees need to be here for a year, we would let them be here for only 30 days before they can start receiving donations. And that we would have listed the four of the 6 reasons that The FFCRA allows us to pay employees that additional time. The reasons we did not have on here is because if someone is out for childcare reasons, the FFCRA does allow us to pay them 2/3 of their time for up to 10 weeks. So they're not receiving nothing while they're out. So I am asking that we be allowed to update this leave policy so that individuals have just another option to be able to receive full paychecks if they need to be out, because COVID can happen probably more than once to an individual. That's my request.
And it's kind of for, new younger employees that might not have a big bank of sick and vacation, that we don't want to burn it all up, and then they're stuck for any future sicknesses or vacation or something like that. So, and plus it doesn't allow them to go negative and have a free run. I mean, if they were to accept additional vacation, I mean, people are donating this, so hopefully they're not going to use it this way.
In general, has the crew been healthy? Have we had that you're aware of?
We have not had any positive employees at this point. We have had a couple of close contact. We do have one full-time employee who is currently on the 14-day quarantine. The spouse has been released from the healthcare provider, but he's still out for another couple of weeks. And we've just also recently discovered that there is a part-time employee who's also now going to fall into this. So far we've done amazingly well with it. But we haven't had to use this. It's simply I'd like to have something just in case.
Absolutely. Yep. I was just going to say, I watched the daily numbers in Cass County these past few weeks, and I still don't know anybody that I can say, oh, Dave tested positive. Don't know anybody, but yet there's 40 to 60 every day out of Cass County, it seems like. So
we've had employees who are being tested, but they're not coming up positive.
Well, and I sent out to the commissioners directors, the city's going to have that briefing at 11 today, and I mean, some of my talk with the mayor, Bruce Rubb, is, there's some explanations of why Cass County is so positive. So I mean, they're gonna go through that and explain that. And, it's kind of, I think the mayor's had some conversations with the governor that the governor would say, we're gonna open up the rest of the state, but not Cass County. Mahoney gets a little offended going, hey, we're going above and beyond testing. If you want me to get the numbers where you want the numbers, we'll quit our testing. He gets a little offended by it. Don't isolate us. And that they're going to explain that a little. So, are we good to move this on? Yeah, we're sure. All right. So this agenda wasn't long enough. We got a couple other items. These are just kind of updates. Brian, you out there? Eric?
Yes, I am.
All right, we're finally to others. So if you want to give just a quick update on the additional requests from Post 2 regarding their foundation grant.
Sure. So Fargo Post 2 had received a grant through the grant match program. The Fargo Park District Foundation had recommended approval for a $9,900 grant to upgrade their sound system. Was approved by the park board in 2019 with the understanding that the install would happen in 2020. Since it was approved by the park board, the equipment that they had bid out is out of production, no longer available. So they are looking at different equipment that's about $4,000 more expensive. And so contacted Dave and I, asked about the possibility of receiving additional funding to cover the half of the park district, the half of the amount of the increase. The maximum grant that's allowed under the grant match program is $15,000. And like I mentioned, their original grant was for $9,900. I had a little conversation with Jerry yesterday. He was uncomfortable taking action as a park board, at least, he personally, without this going through the Park District Foundation Board again. So a supplemental request that would go to the Park District Foundation Board. I'm assuming the Foundation Board will be meeting in June. I don't know, that this is going to impact post 2. I'm not sure, that they need to get this done immediately or, kind of what their situation is. But so I talked with Dave about it yesterday. He asked that we just bring it up and discuss real briefly today. That's the situation. My takeaway is that I'll contact post 2, ask them to submit a supplemental request that will be considered by the Foundation Board at their June meeting. And then depending on their action, come to the Park Board. The earliest would be in July.
So I'll just jump in. And by the way, last night I saw a little news clip. Post 2 is going to have some kind of season. They were at a practice schedule, but it's not Legion baseball. It's Babe Ruth. So that's going on. Because that was what I mentioned to Brian yesterday. I said, I don't even know if they're playing this year, what they're going to do. I figured they might go kind of a rogue schedule outside of the Legion. But, where I come down on this request is it just seems to me like we awarded them $9,900 to buy a sound system, and that was quite some time ago, and now for whatever reason they come back and they can't get the equipment. It's going to cost more. It just seems to me that if they need more money, they should come back and have an amendment to their request or some way, some process, so we don't have to deal with this on a routine basis where we grant 5,000 here, 6,000 there, and every time we do it, the group we give the money to comes back and says, well, it was a little bit more than I thought. So, it just seems to me that this kind of form, I don't want to get out of
You want to keep it going.
I want to just have a repetitive.
You don't want to start a precedent.
There you go. I couldn't think of precedent.
Well, we're going to probably have the same type of scenario with fast pitch. They had a request for wind screens, and I've got a price for slats, which are going to be much more durable, so they might have to have a supplemental request.
And generally, when a grant round is a grant round, and you received your grant funds, and that's what you spent. And if it was enough, it was enough, and if it wasn't, you came up with the funds on your own. It isn't that you're not mom and dad.
Yeah.
Gee, mom, I thought it was gonna cost 10,000, but it really costs 14, and I only have 12.
Yeah.
So,
if you want to take it even to that extreme, we granted them $9,900. Good luck. If you don't, if that's not enough, come back and reapply for the next round.
Yeah.
That would take it. So instead of an amendment, go to the next round and try again.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
The money part isn't factored here. It's, because there's another $2,000, it's like, but still precedent is the part that bothers me.
So the recommendation to have to go to the next grant round, or do you have a supplemental?
Well, that's my opinion. I'm one person.
I could leave that way too. Then we shut it down on all future requests.
Right.
If they didn't ask for enough and they have to have more, then they come up with it or reapply. Come up with it or reapply. Yeah.
So just an FYI, the next grant round will be July 1st. So if they were interested in going that route, they would fill out an application, submit it prior to July 1st. It would be on the July Foundation Board meeting agenda.
And is that before the July Park Board agenda?
No, the Foundation Board meets the third Monday of the month. So the Monday after the Park Board meeting.
So a motion not to move forward and have them reapply.
Either
recommendation.
Keep the one they got, come up with a difference or reapply. I like that.
Got that right?
Yep, got it. Thank you. Aren't you impressed that I was still paying attention enough at the end of this meeting?
There was about a 20-second delay, so you might have been catnapping.
I had it on mute. I didn't want to disturb the course of the meeting.
Paul left the meeting and called you.
You should have made Paul sit here and text you when you came up, so you wouldn't have to be in.
All right, so we got direction on that. The last one, and just kind of an update. We did put out request proposals for a consultant to do a study on the Island Park pool renovation and what we would need, user groups, whatever. And I'm guessing in the past we've got a price from maybe Associated Pool or something and said, budget price, what's this gonna cost us? We budgeted $25,000 back in 19 for 2020. Went out for RFPs. We opened up all those, we had 4 submittals, and just basically based on their fees were $89, $56, $58 an hourly rate. So we were well outside our budget.
So on that, Dave Horn did reach out to Associated Pools. They did put that $25,000 budget in. Where it's over is the initial conversations with these user groups, i.e. Green Play, that would come in, and other people that would come in to do that assessment, to meet with these user groups. That was about $30,000 of the proposals that were submitted. So,
yeah, no, so at this time, we're just recommending we draft a new RFP and maybe remove as much of the user group or change the scope to fit in within the 25.
So we'll do that part. I mean, we know Dave Blunt's 30 years experience. We know who's down there. Gators, lap swimmers, we won't have Ryan part of that.
Open,
public, yep. So we can conduct that and get that information before we proceed. It'll save us $30,000.
So our recommendation is just not to move forward with the current RFP.
And we're working on that. Once we get the pools open and everybody trained and updated on the COVID policies, Dave will be working on that RFP for that.
Well, I'm glad you jumped in and said that, Kevin, because my immediate thought when I was listening to Dave is, we know who our users are down there. We should be able to do that just as easily as hiring a third party to credit.
So, with all that, we're at the end. Any questions, comments?
Probably the longest facilities meeting I've been in a while.
Yeah, exhausting. Yeah, this is as long as I've had a mask on since we started wearing masks. Here's mustard. Here's are good. So we're opening pools?
Yeah, we will open, we'll open north, south, and Davies Friday, 5th.
Saturday the 6th, and then Monday, Island Park and Madison. Part of that reason is we had about 15 guards that were not certified because of the Red Cross certification would not allow them to proceed. As of June 1, they will allow that. So during that weekend prior to opening Island Park was when our certification will be conducted at Island Park. So
they are filling Island Park.
Correct.
So how are we putting up signs and how are we encouraging social distancing in the swimming pool?
We're putting up signs, limiting deck chairs if we can provide deck chairs at this point. We have staff that will be monitoring the locker rooms.
So locker rooms are open?
Yep, they can be usable per the.
Well, it's recommended you wear your suit, you wear sweats over, you wear your suit, you go home.
That way. And there will be limited, social distancing in the locker rooms for shower services, but they're allowed. No masks in the water. because it's obviously a safety issue once you're in the water for breathing purposes. There will be guards that will be rotating. When they do the rotation, the new guards that come on will be cleaning those chairs for the ones that are leaving, and then they'll rotate all the way through to clean areas of those facilities. So,
are we gonna spray like we're doing in the golf courses, using the weed sprayers with disinfectant on it?
he's working with Barry on that spray product right now. Yeah. Just talked about that yesterday. Different times.
And as I always say, you're swimming in a bucket of sanitizers.
Yeah, the water doesn't scare me, it's people in it. But you have to learn to live with this.
I'm going to set a slides from Dr. Paul Carson, an epidemiologist at NDSU, and he talks about, more we're learning about this, that the outdoor, anything outdoor is not, the transmission rate is so small. That we shouldn't be concerned, is what he basically said. And I don't want to paraphrase it too much, but I'll send the slides out so you guys can see what he put in there. Because he used the reference, he goes, if I was on the street and a jogger came by me, I wouldn't even think about it. So
we've been asked by, we run with CDB in about 40 or 50 user groups in the area. Alex is part of that conversation. Softball is part of it, soccer is part of it. The Softball Association asked if we would provide sanitary stuff for their games, and I said, no. They'll need to provide that. We'll provide the facility, make sure the bathrooms and the restrooms are clean. But, we have a buddy over at Steins that said he's been contacted if those user groups had sprayed on the fence and posts. It's like, what limit do you cut that off?
well, and the recent CDC stuff says that contact surface transmission is really, it's not happening, right? So,
and you're entering and exiting out of one area of the complex. So, you're not, those are open gates. It's not like you're touching it.
Right.
But what they're saying is the germs are, once they hit a surface, they aren't.
They're
not as contagious as if I just sneeze right on top of you. Because it's.
They're not living out.
Very right. So, but changes every 4 or 6 hours. So
yeah, that's the way around.
how do we know? Live it. Well, I do think it's good to be outside. We need to encourage people to be outside for stuff. So. Not just because we're in the park business, but because it really is. I mean, we can be afraid of it and hide in our homes, but that's a detriment to our health as well.
And that announcement from Markley will go up today for the pools.
All right, everybody's dismissed now.
All right. Everybody have a good day.
You too.
Stay safe, wash your hands.